My name is Helen, and I have a story to share with you. I was married to Jake for a very long period. Our son Tommy had finished college and was working in an office downtown. He had moved out of his own property some time ago and was now renting it out. Jake was employed by Steinman Financials in the finance division, and my role was deputy chief accountant. Before becoming married, we both signed a prenuptial agreement. It said that in the case of a divorce, the money would be split evenly, and the property would belong to whoever's name was on it. At the time, that made sense. First, we purchased an apartment under my name, and then we purchased a house under Jake's name. Every one of us owned an automobile. Jake detested having me browse for furniture and other goods, even online. I preserved all of the receipts because, I am an accountant. I never knew when they might be useful. Jake has been preoccupied with our retirement lately. He would pore over financial news for hours on end, grumbling about growing living expenses and inflation. He would complain over breakfast. Have you seen gas prices lately? Let's not even talk about groceries. At this pace, how are we going to have a comfortable retirement? I would attempt to comfort him, but he was as clingy as a puppy. He would investigate plans to get rich rapidly, constantly searching for the silver bullet. He got home one day full of enthusiasm about day trading. He waved his iPad at me and said, "Helen, I think I found our ticket. Observe these stock graphs. We could quickly quadruple our money if we play it correctly." I gave a head shake. Jake, it's too dangerous. We are unable to risk our savings. After that, he pouted for days, but I didn't back down. Not risky endeavors, but stability was what we needed. Jake proposed that we go for a stroll one evening. The streets were quiet and the air was fresh. He began talking about retiring once again as we walked. Helen, there's a way we could make a few $100,000 easy. Set ourselves up for a cushy retirement, he remarked in a low, conspiratorial voice. I arched an eyebrow. Oh, I see. How are things there? He leaned in more. We may take some cash out of the business accounts. To make it appear authentic, I can arrange the financing and transactions. All you have to do is force them through accounting. I came to a complete stop. Are you for real this time? Jake, that is stealing. We could end up in prison. With a giggle, he raised his hands. Slow down. I was only jesting to see how honest you were. I felt a little more at ease, but still uneasy. Jake, that's not funny. Don't make jokes about such things. I apologize, he murmured, continuing to laugh. Come on, let's head back. We strolled home in peace, but I still felt uneasy in my stomach. I couldn't quite put my finger on what had changed. After that night, everything returned to normal, but something had changed. Though I couldn't quite put my finger on it, Jake appeared different, perhaps more aloof. I attempted to dismiss it as work-related stress. Our top accountant abruptly left us one day. The business hired a successor without delay. Her name was Vivian, and she exuded confidence as she strode into our office, looking stunning and youthful. She arrived quite dashingly. Everyone, pay attention, she declared on her first day. Here, things are about to change. I just anticipate the finest performance from my group. Her gaze rested on me for an extended period, causing a shiver to travel down my back. I sensed she wasn't pleased with my serving as her deputy. I was accurate. For the next 2 weeks, Vivian was a living nightmare. She would continuously critique my work, requiring me to rewrite reports several times to catch even the smallest mistakes. A few days later, I discovered a conspicuous mistake in Vivian's estimates during a management meeting. I was hesitant to humiliate her, but my feeling of obligation overcame my hesitation. Pardon me, I said, my tone faltering. I believe that one of these figures is incorrect. The quarterly estimates are not adding up. Mr. Steinman, the director of the corporation, leaned forward. Is this true, Vivian? Vivian had a bright red face. She grabbed the report from me and gave it a cursory glance before forcing a grin. It appears like a little oversight occurred. I appreciate you seeing that, Helen. The words were loaded with poison. She cornered me in her office the moment the meeting concluded. Listen here, you old hag, she growled, losing all pretense of authority. I don't care how long you've been here. I'm in charge now, and I'm going to make your life miserable until you quit. I refuse to back down. I refuse to give up. I'm not guilty of anything. Her chuckle was harsh and cold. Your aunt and I will discuss it then. One mistake, ice and Helen, and you're out. I felt a mixture of terror and resolve as I walked out of her office. I had put in too much labor to be replaced by a young upstart. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Vivian seemed to be on a personal mission to make my life miserable. She'd pile work on my desk minutes before I was supposed to leave, criticize every little thing I did, and make snide comments in front of the whole team. I tried to keep my head down and do my job, but it was getting harder every day. Jake wasn't much help either. He'd come home late, barely talk during dinner, and spend most of his time glued to his phone. One particularly rough day, I decided to stay late to finish up some reports. The office was quiet. Most people had gone home. As I was about to leave, I heard voices coming from Vivian's office. Curiosity got the better of me, and I crept closer to listen. Everything's going according to plan, I heard Vivian say. That old bag won't know what hit her. A man's voice responded, but it was too low for me to make out the words. My heart was pounding so loud, I was sure they'd hear it. Just then, the door started to open. I bolted, nearly dropping my purse in my haste to get to the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of a man leaving Vivian's office. I couldn't see his face, but something about his build seemed familiar. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Who was Vivian talking to? What were they planning? And why did that man seem familiar? The next morning, I was called into Mr. Steinman's office. My stomach dropped as I saw Vivian standing there, a triumphant smirk on her face. Helen, Mr. Steinman began, his voice grave. I'm afraid we have to let you go. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. What? Why? Vivian has brought some concerns to my attention, he said, not meeting my eyes. She feels you're not performing up to our standards. I tried to argue, to explain how Vivian had been treating me unfairly, how she could be harming the company, but Mr. Steinman wouldn't budge. Vivian comes highly recommended, he said. A good friend of mine vouched for her. I trust his judgment. As I stood there, shell-shocked, Mr. Steinman's expression softened slightly. Look, Helen, I appreciate your years of service. I'll make sure you get the maximum possible bonus. It's usually reserved for upper management, but I think you've earned it. I nodded numbly, barely hearing his words. As I turned to leave, Vivian's voice stopped me. Don't forget to clear out your desk, she said sweetly. We wouldn't want you to leave anything important behind. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the malice behind her perfect smile. In that moment, I knew this was personal. But why? What had I ever done to her? When I got home, the house was empty. I called Jake, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice breaking as I explained what had happened. As I sat on our couch, staring at the walls, I felt lost. My job had been such a big part of my identity. Who was I without it? The next few months were a whirlwind. At first, I tried to enjoy my unexpected vacation. I threw myself into home projects. finally tackling that renovation I'd been putting off for years. One evening, as I was putting the finishing touches on our newly renovated living room, Jake came home with a gleam in his eye. "Helen," he said, excitement clear in his voice, "I've got an idea. Let's buy a new house." I blinked at him, paintbrush still in hand. "What? We just finished renovating this one." He waved dismissively. "Yeah, but think about it. With all the work you've done, we could sell this place for a fortune. Add in a bit more cash, and we could get a real luxury home. There's one for sale just a few blocks over. It's got a pool and everything." I hesitated. "I don't know, Jake. We've put so much work into this place." "Come on, Helen," he pressed. "I've already got a buyer lined up for this house. All we need to do is sell your apartment, you know, the one we've been renting out, and we'll have more than enough." Something about his eagerness set off alarm bells in my head, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was Jake, my husband. If I couldn't trust him, who could I trust? "Okay," I said finally. "Let's do it." The next few weeks were a blur of real estate agents, paperwork, and packing. I sold my apartment, putting the money into our joint account as Jake suggested. It felt strange letting go of a place that had been mine for so long, but Jake's enthusiasm was infectious. The day before we were set to move, Jake came home early. "Hey, honey," he called out. "I need you to do me a favor. Can you give the place a real deep clean? I'm bringing someone over tonight to see the house." I spent the day scrubbing and polishing, making sure every surface gleamed. By evening, I was exhausted but satisfied. The house looked better than it ever had. As I heard a car pull up outside, I smoothed down my hair and straightened my clothes. Time to make a good impression on our buyer. The front door opened, and I plastered on my best smile. But as Jake walked in, followed by his guest, my smile froze on my face. It was Vivian. She sauntered in, her eyes roaming over the house with a proprietary air. Then her gaze landed on me, and a slow, cruel smile spread across her face. "Well, well," she drawled. "Looks like the maid service has already been here." I stood there stunned as she turned to Jake. "You were right, darling. It's perfect." I looked at Jake, praying for some kind of explanation, but the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. "Helen," he said, his voice cold and unfamiliar, "I want a divorce." The room spun around me as I tried to process Jake's words. Divorce, and with Vivian. "What's going on?" I managed to choke out. Jake's face was set in a hard line. "It's simple, Helen. I love Vivian. We want to be together." Vivian draped herself over Jake, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "That's right, honey. I'm not just taking your job, I'm taking your husband too." I felt like I was in some kind of twisted nightmare. "How long?" I whispered. Jake at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "A while," he admitted, "but that's not important now. What's important is that we part ways amicably." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Amicably? You've been cheating on me, and you want amicable." He held up his hands. "Look, I'm trying to be fair here. We'll split all the money in the joint accounts 50-50, just like the prenup says. I'll keep the house since it's in my name. Clean break." My mind was reeling, but something clicked into place. The apartment sale, the rush to move. It had all been part of their plan. "You manipulated me," I said, my voice growing stronger. "You made me sell my apartment so you could get your hands on more cash." Jake shrugged, not even bothering to deny it. "It's just business, Helen. Nothing personal." I saw red. Nothing personal. This is my life you're destroying. Vivian laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "Oh, honey, your life was already over. You're just too pathetic to realize it." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. "Fine," I said, my voice steady. "I'll go, but I'm taking what's mine." Jake looked relieved. "Sure, whatever. Just be out by morning." I nodded, then turned and walked calmly to the phone. Jake and Vivian watched, puzzled as I dialed. "Hello, Speedy Movers. I need a team here first thing in the morning. Yes, it's a full house move." Jake's face darkened. "What are you doing?" I smiled, a cold, hard smile that felt foreign on my face. "I'm taking what's mine, Jake. Every single thing I bought for this house. Hope you and your mistress enjoy your empty love nest." The look of shock on their faces was almost worth the pain of the past few hours, almost. As I headed upstairs to pack my personal belongings, I heard them arguing in fierce whispers. Let them fight, I thought. I had work to do. I spent the night sorting through papers, gathering every receipt I'd saved over the years. By morning, I had a clear inventory of everything that legally belonged to me. When the movers arrived, Jake tried to stop them, yelling about the prop. But I calmly showed them the receipts and the clause in our agreement stating that individually purchased items remained the property of the buyer. Item by item, the house was emptied. Furniture, appliances, even the food in the fridge, all loaded into the moving van. Jake and Vivian watched in horrified silence as their perfect plan crumbled around them. As the last box was loaded, I turned to face them one last time. Jake looked shell-shocked, while Vivian's face was contorted with rage. "Enjoy your new life," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm sure it'll be everything you dreamed of." The next few days were a blur of activity. I rented a small storage unit for my belongings and checked into a modest hotel. My mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened and figure out my next move. On the second day, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a lawyer representing Jake. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice cold and unprofessional. "I'm calling to inform you that your actions regarding the removal of property from your marital home were illegal. My client demands the immediate return of all items." I laughed, surprising even myself with how steady my voice was. "I don't think so. Everything I took, I purchased. I have the receipts to prove it." The lawyer paused, clearly not expecting this response. "Nevertheless, the prenup agreement." I interrupted, "You're welcome to review it now. If you'll excuse me, I have my own legal matters to attend to." I hung up, my heart pounding. I knew this was far from over, but I felt a small thrill of victory. For once, I was fighting back. That evening, I called my son Tommy. I hadn't told him about the divorce yet, and my heart ached at the thought of breaking the news. "Mom," he answered, his voice concerned. "Is everything okay?" I've been trying to reach Dad, but he's not answering. I took a deep breath. "Tommy, there's something I need to tell you. Your father and I are getting a divorce." There was a long silence on the other end. "Then what? Why? What happened?" I explained as best I could, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice for Tommy's sake. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "What can I do? Do you need a place to stay?" I smiled, grateful for his support. "No, honey, I'm okay for now, but there is something you could do for me." I explained my plan, feeling a twinge of guilt for involving Tommy, but I needed someone I could trust completely, and who better than my own son? Tommy agreed without hesitation. "I'll do whatever you need, Mom. Dad's made his choice. I'm on your side." As I hung up, I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness for the family we once were, anger at Jake's betrayal, but also a fierce determination. I had been knocked down, but I wasn't out, not by a long shot. I pulled out a notebook and began to write, outlining my plan. Jake and Vivian thought they had won, but they had no idea what was coming. I was going to take back everything they had stolen from me: my job, my dignity, and my future. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Tommy, true to his word, moved back into Jake's house, claiming he wanted to support his father during this difficult time. Jake, caught off guard by this unexpected show of filial loyalty, welcomed him with open arms. Little did Jake know that Tommy was my eyes and ears inside the house. Every night we'd talk on the phone, and he'd fill me in on what he discovered. "Mom, you won't believe this," Tommy whispered one night. "I managed to get into Dad's computer. There are emails between him and Vivian going back months. They've been planning this for a long time." My heart clenched, but I pushed the pain aside. "What else did you find?" His voice dropped even lower. "There are some weird financial documents I don't understand. Most of it looks shady." I felt a spark of hope. This could be the break I needed. "Can you make copies?" "Already done," Tommy said. "I'll drop them off at your hotel tomorrow." True to his word, Tommy delivered a USB drive filled with documents the next day. As I pored over the files, my accountant's brain kicked into high gear. The more I read, the more my suspicions grew. There were discrepancies in the company's financial reports, money moving between accounts that shouldn't exist. At the center of it all were Jake and Vivian's names. I remembered Jake's joke about embezzling money from the company. It seemed it wasn't a joke after all. Armed with this information, I knew it was time to make my move. I called my lawyer, explaining what I had found. "This is serious, Helen," he said, his voice grave. "If what you're saying is true, we're looking at major fraud, but we need more concrete evidence." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I understand. What do you suggest?" "We need to get the company involved," he said. "If we can prove that Jake and Vivian have been stealing from Steinman Financials, it could change everything in your divorce proceedings." The next day, I marched into Steinman Financials, my head held high. As I walked through the familiar corridors, I could feel the stares of my former colleagues. Some looked sympathetic, others curious. But I ignored them all. I knocked on Mr. Steinman's door, my heart pounding. "Come in," his voice called out. As I stepped into his office, his eyes widened in surprise. "Helen, what are you doing here?" I took a deep breath. "Mr. Steinman, I need to talk to you. It's about Jake and Vivian, and it's about your company." For the next hour, I laid out everything I had discovered. The suspicious transfers, the hidden accounts, the discrepancies in the reports. Mr. Steinman's face grew increasingly pale as I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone. "Get me the head of security and our legal team now." He looked back at me, his expression a mix of anger and gratitude. "Helen, I owe you an apology and a thank you. If what you're saying is true, you may have saved this company from disaster." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity at Steinman Financials. Mr. Steinman, acting on the information I'd provided, ordered an urgent audit of the company's accounts. The results were shocking even to me. The auditors confirmed what I'd suspected. Money was indeed being siphoned from the company's accounts to unknown destinations. The total amount stolen was staggering, approximately $400,000. I felt sick to my stomach thinking about how long this must have been going on right under my nose. A large-scale investigation followed, involving not just the company's internal team, but also external forensic accountants and law enforcement. As the evidence mounted, there was no doubt left. Jake and Vivian were guilty of extensive fraud. I watched from the sidelines as their world came crashing down. Police officers arrived at the office one morning, leading both Jake and Vivian away in handcuffs. Their property and accounts were seized, and a criminal case was opened for economic crimes. Despite the satisfaction of seeing justice served, the aftermath was messy and painful. Because of the prenuptial agreement we'd signed years ago, I couldn't reclaim the money from the apartment I'd sold. Instead, those funds, along with our other joint accounts, were split equally between us. The house, being in Jake's name, remained his property. However, my lawyer fought hard, and we managed to secure some victories. I received financial compensation from Jake amounting to 50% of our house's value, plus lifelong alimony. It wasn't everything I'd hoped for, but it was something. But I wasn't done. I went after Vivian too, demanding compensation for the trauma and financial loss I'd suffered due to her actions. The court sided with me, ordering her to pay over $35,000 in damages. In the end, Jake and Vivian received suspended sentences for their fraud. All their property was confiscated, leaving them deep in debt. The court also barred them from holding any senior positions in the future. Their careers, like their reputations, were in tatters. I had a range of feelings as I exited the courtroom following the final hearing, including optimism, despair, and fury. I'd survived the worst few months of my life, and I felt stronger than before. With a considerable sum of money in my bank account, I had discovered a significant scam, restored my reputation, and safeguarded my financial future. I determined that a new beginning was necessary. I spent weeks looking until I finally discovered the ideal location: a modest home on the outskirts of town with a lovely yard. I felt a sense of tranquility that I hadn't had in years as I stood on the porch and took in the orderly rows of flowers and vegetables. It was nothing like the opulent house I'd inhabited with Jake. I poured myself into making the house my own again by refurbishing it. I put up bookshelves for my expanding collection, painted the walls in bright, cheery hues, and organized a little home office with a view of the garden. Tommy came around frequently to keep me company and assist with the heavier tasks. He turned to me and smiled one evening as we sipped lemonade on the porch swing I'd erected. "You know, Mom, I'm really proud of you," he said. "Look at you now, after all that went on. You're fantastic." Tears began to fill up in my eyes. "I'm grateful, honey. You have no idea how much that means to me." Just when I was getting used to my new life, Mr. Steinman gave me an unexpected call. "Helen," he replied, his voice soft, "I hope all is well with you. I would want to make you a proposal." It turned out that Steinman Financials needed a new head accountant, and they wanted me, once the controversy over the fraud had subsided. Mr. Steinman remarked, "Your work in exposing the fraud was outstanding. Someone with your abilities and moral character is needed. In addition, you'll receive a sizable bonus as compensation for keeping the business afloat." I was unable to speak. It took me a while to find my voice. "Mr. Steinman, I am at a loss for words. I'm grateful. That would be a privilege." It seemed strange to be back at work on my first day. I held my head high as I entered the building as the new chief accountant, not as a humiliated former employee. I received congrats and grins from my old coworkers. With a big smile on his face, Mr. Steinman greeted me in the foyer. He surprised me by pulling me into an embrace. He murmured, "Welcome back, Helen," in a voice full of emotion. "We're lucky to have you." I experienced a level of fulfillment in my new position that I hadn't felt in years. I was surrounded by individuals who appreciated me while working at a job I liked. I was able to pay off my new property and save a nest egg for the future thanks to the significant financial incentive. I would go back to my modest house in the evenings, take care of my garden, and unwind on the porch swing. Tommy would come along sometimes, but other times I just like to be alone myself. I started enrolling in literature, art, and even a culinary course at the community college nearby. It was the first time in years that I was putting my personal development and pleasure first.